Hello, and welcome back to the YouTube channel. 2024 is gone. It's just gone. I don't know where it went. Somehow it's January 1st. Not super sure how that all happened, but we're here. This was the best reading year of my life, and I don't mean that dramatically. I mean that in the way that my original 2024 reading goal was 50 books. 50. I read 141. So this year was full of amazing reads. I really got into immersive reading this year, and my reading journey just kind of took off. Today, I want to go through all of the best books of each month of this year. It was kind of hard to pick the book of the year this year. We'll get to that at the end. I read a lot of good books, so it was really hard to choose which book I considered my favorite read of 2024. So let's get into it. All right, in January, I can't believe this was this year. This feels like it happened a long time ago. The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This book was my first 6-star read of the year, and it was in January, okay? This was actually a book club pick for my in real life book club here in the town that I live in. This book follows the main character, Linus Baker, who works for the department in charge of magical youth. And one day he's summoned by the extremely upper management and is told that he is to go to the House in the Cerulean Sea and to report back to them whether or not that orphanage should be shut down. This book follows a lot of characters. All of the kids are a part of the orphanage that Linus has to go and report to see if it's even worth funding that orphanage anymore. And at first, Linus is just such an absolute Debbie Downer of a character. He really feels at the beginning of this book that there's not much left for him to live for anymore. So the whole story kind of follows how these kids that he meets at this orphanage kind of bring him back to life. It is just the most beautiful book I've ever read. I used to work with kids. I don't anymore. I left that profession probably 2 years ago now. This sung to my heart for the kids that I worked with. And it's just such a good book about found family and that not everything is as it seems, and you got to look deeper into the person. Don't judge a book off its cover is exactly how I would say this book is. And yeah, this was absolutely incredible. And the fact that I read this in January was a great start to 2024. For February, I read Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This was also a book club pick for the book club in my small town here. And this book surprised me tenfold. Cemetery Boys follows a young boy named Yadriel. He is a trans boy, and his family is having a really hard time accepting the fact that he's a trans boy. Several family members still call him by his birth name, and there's just a lot of issues with family acceptance in this book. His cousin Miguel ends up being unalived, and it is upon Yadriel's shoulders to become a brujo, which is a person who can summon the dead, and try to figure out who unalived Miguel. It ends up not going the way it's supposed to go, and, you know, we end up meeting Julian, and he ends up helping Yadriel figure out who unalived Miguel. This story was absolutely incredible. This is so important, especially for young adult audiences. Just how important it is for acceptance from family and friends and loved ones. Again, the fact that I read this in February feels like it was forever ago. I actually have more work by Aiden Thomas that I want to get to this year in 2025. But yeah, I would highly recommend Cemetery Boys if you haven't read this before. It is such a beautiful story. In March, I read Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. And holy crap. This book, I was not expecting this to be as good as it was. This was my favorite read of March, and for good reason. The main character that we're following in this story is Gabriel de Leon. In the beginning of the story, Gabriel is in a prison and he's being interrogated by vampires. Not cute Edward Cullen vampires. I'm talking like, ooh, we'll unalive you, where you stand vampires. And they are trying to figure out where a certain object is that is supposed to help the vampires win the war. Gabriel de Leon tells his entire story through the an interview aspect. So it starts from the beginning, it kind of jumps all over the place, but this story, the action, the horror, the fantasy, oh my God, the way this book had me crying, laughing, I just loved it. And Gabriel de Leon is the most sarcastic son of a bitch I have ever met in my life, and I loved him for that. This is such a good book. I would recommend this book if you are looking for something that is high-ish fantasy, but also like vampires. If you're into spooky vampires, this is it. I still think about this book. I read book 2 this year as well, which was still good, but not as good as the first one. And I don't know when book 3 is coming. Hate that for me. I would still recommend you read this book. It's a very good read, and it kept me entertained the whole time. I was not bored once throughout this novel, so definitely pick it up. In April, my favorite read of the month was Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. This book is so entirely unique to itself. I have never read anything quite like this book. This has been on my TBR and my shelves for quite some time, and I just decided that this was the year that I was going to read it. And I'm really glad I did. This book shows, once again, the importance of you really don't know who people are under the surface. This follows a couple of main characters that are all visiting the same real estate apartment. The real estate agent is trying to sell this apartment, and there just so happens to be a robbery down the street, and we end up finding out what happens there. And this is just such a beautiful story about anxiety and just what lengths people will go to do what they need to do for themselves. This was my first book that I ever read by Fredrik Backman, and I very much enjoy his writing style. It makes you think, it's critical thinking, but you don't have to think super hard. It's once you get to the end of the book, you find the real meaning of the story. It was beautiful. I would recommend this to everybody. This is such an important read for a lot of people, especially in today's world, to read Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This was my favorite book of May. This was such a beautiful wrap up to this duology. This book got a lot of mixed reviews. The first book, Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, is such an intense and incredible story that I feel like a lot of people were looking for either one of two things: more romance or more fantasy. And this had a little bit of both. This was one of those books though where, yes, it was a little slow in the beginning for me. However, when it picked up, it picked up. The way this story ended was just perfect. It was a perfect end to a duology. I didn't want any more or any less from this book. I still want to read more Rebecca Ross in the future because this duology, stunning. If you have not read Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, please do it. 2025 is here. It's time for new books, new TBRs. It is 110% worth the read. June's favorite read was By a Thread by Lucy Score. Lucy Score, she knew what she was doing with this one, okay? This was Grumpy Sunshine. This was workplace romance. This was he was her boss, okay? Allie, the FMC in this book, is such a baddie. She is such a baddie with such a incredible backstory that even when I finished this book, I looked up the epilogue. There's like 3 epilogues to this book, and I went and downloaded the 3rd one because I wanted this story to keep going. I wanted to know what happened with Dominic and Allie. These two were perfect for each other. This was not insta love. This was slow burn meets, wow, I'm really falling for her. He's such a dick to her. I like Grumpy Sunshines. I don't know. This was fantastic. For my birthday month, June, this was fantastic. I would recommend everybody read this book. This is not like the other books I have read by Lucy Score. Lucy Score is my small town romance girly. She is the author that I go to for small town romance, and this is a city. This is kind of giving The Devil Wears Prada if the devil was Dominic. That's what I would say. I loved this story. If you are looking for any of the tropes that I mentioned before, this is your book. Is she a little thick? Yeah, but so worth it. Would it even be a yearly wrap-up if I didn't bring up Emily Henry Funny Story by Emily Henry was my favorite read for July. The story follows Daphne and her experience with her fiance Peter, who ends up having an affair with his longtime best friend Petra. She ends up moving in with Miles, who is Petra's ex, and they end up having a really interesting situation because Miles is the only person who can understand what Daphne's going through. So she's like, well, we can connect this way. And the story kind of takes off from there. A lot of their background comes out in this book, and by the end of the book, you are just sobbing and thinking about what a wonderful story this is. Funny Story is the perfect title for this book. And that's what I'll say about that. Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This was my favorite read for August. This is kind of a love-hate book. You either love it or you hate it, and I loved it. This was fantastic. The twist I did not see coming. There were a couple of twists in this book, and I didn't see any of them coming, okay? This book follows Adam and Amelia Wright, and Amelia has entered to win a weekend getaway to this secluded, and I mean secluded, cabin in the middle of nowhere, and they end up winning. They don't know how they won, but they end up winning. They get the address to go to this cabin in the woods to get a little weekend getaway, to get some alone time, to get some one-on-one time. The story kind of unfolds in a group of letters from his wife, and you kind of see the truth behind the details. You kind of read in between the lines of what their relationship is actually like. And this book is so fast-paced. I read this in like a day and a half. By the end of this book, you're wondering if you should ever go out in the woods. The answer is no, don't go out in the woods. This year, I read the Gods and Monsters series by Amber V. Nicole. And for the month of September, The Dawn of the Cursed Queen was my favorite read. Guys, I can't even really talk about this book. Just know that there are two main characters, Diana and Sam Kyle, and they are in it by this book, okay? This book, the lore that is coming out of this series that I wasn't expecting, I'm thoroughly enjoying this series simply because the lore keeps feeding me. You know, all those people out there that make their own sourdoughs, it's like feeding your starter. That's how I feel with this series. It's just feeding me bit by bit. This series is supposed to be 7 books long, and I can't wait. Normally when I see 7 books in a series, I get a little nervous. I'm like, oh God, 7? That's a lot of books. That's a lot of books. Now with this one, I can't wait for 7. Please keep feeding me. Feed the starter, okay? If you have not read The Book of Azrael by Amber V. Nicole, please read it. Sam Kyle may be my new book boyfriend because he is just so incredible. He is a golden retriever. He is a deadly cinnamon roll, and I love him for it. Please read this series. I jumped on that bandwagon and read Phantasma in the month of October. Blackwell. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Blackwell. He may also be a new book boyfriend. I don't know. I was into it. A ghost that talks and also does a lot of things with his hands and his not hands. That's all I need, right? That's all you need in a book like this. It follows Ophelia, and Ophelia and her sister have this mansion, this estate, this Victorian estate, and their mother tragically passes, and they are in charge of the estate. And they find out that Mama is dead broke. Get it? Dead broke? Huh. They have to find a way to come up with a lot of money very quickly to be able to hold their estate. And then Phantasma rolls into town, which is like a trials, games, very deadly affair. And Ophelia takes it upon herself to enter this trial after her sister goes mysteriously missing. And she can only assume that she went into Phantasma to try to win the reward money from getting first place in Phantasma. This was good soup. Good soup. And I couldn't pick a better book for my favorite in October. This month, November, I read That Sick Love by Jessie Hall. Wow. This book was something. This book follows the main FMC, Bryony, and she is a part of the church. And she ends up being mysteriously stalked by a man that she assumes is Arrow, and Arrow is crazy. Like crazy, crazy. He is trying to save her from the church because he's seeing things that she doesn't, and he's trying to take her purity away from her. That way they can take down the church together. This story, guys, I am foaming at the mouth to get my hands on a physical copy of this book because I want to highlight and just devour this book one more time, probably 7 more times. I am brand new to dark romance, okay? This year was like my first really jump head dive into dark romance, and this book delivered. Was this actually crazy? Yeah, dude. Yeah, this book was insanity, but it was such a good time. Their story is beautiful, beautiful and tortured and toxic. And if you have yet to read this book and are looking for something a little dark, well, not a lot of dark, and just overall like take down the monarchy type of situation, this is your book. This book was fantastic. And then in the month of December is where I read not only one book that topped them all for the month of December, but topped them all for the year. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Now, if you have been following along on TikTok and Instagram, you know that this was the first time I have ever read Harry Potter ever. And I've been watching the movies as I've been reading the books. The actual emotional damage that this book did to me, and all the books in this series, especially books 4 through 7, was just detrimental to me. Okay, I actually had to put this book down several times because I legit was like, I can't do this right now. I can't take this anymore. This finale was everything I could want and more in a series. The last time I felt this way about a book series was when I finished Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. I was thinking about that series, and I still, dear God, I still think about that series to this day, and that is how I will be about Harry Potter. If you are familiar with Harry Potter and you have read Harry Potter, watched the movies, done all the things, you know that this ending, I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for this ending, but it was so beautiful and just such a great wrap up of this world. And that epilogue, that epilogue was just incredible. And I will be rereading this series. I will be. And I will watch the movies probably yearly for the rest of time. But yeah, this was my book of the year. This topped them all. I was actually looking at my bracket that I keep for myself to keep track of what books are my favorite for the year or for the months of the year. And I was looking at them before I read this one, and I was like, I have no idea what my favorite book of the year is going to be. I have no idea what it's going to be. And this is it. I will not stop thinking about this book. This book and this entire series is just a fucking masterpiece. I'll say it. If you are like me and you're an adult and you have never read the Harry Potter books, maybe you've seen the movies, maybe you haven't, please read it. This is more than just some magic. This is more than just some kids running around at Hogwarts. This is so surreal and has real heavy topics. I seriously don't understand how this is YA, to be honest with you. Please read Harry Potter. Just do it. That was my year of reading in 2024. I read some of the best books I've ever read, ever, in 2024. And I can only hope that I reach this amount of books again in 2025. Thank you all so much for being here. And please like and subscribe. And as always, I am on all these other platforms. And yeah, I'll see you again next time. Bye.